Here's what today's little encounter is going to be about. Basically, back in the 1960s, there weren't a lot of computer programmers. There were just a few. I mean, there were some, but not many. In the 70s, there were more programmers. In the 80s, a lot more. One thing that I thought, and this is an example of me being wrong, I thought that, well, the percentage would increase. For example, you had a certain percentage of programmers in the 1950s that were women, a certain percentage in the 1960s, 1970s, it kept going up. So I said in the 80s it'll go up even more, 90s it'll go up even more, like that. Well, I was wrong. I'll tell you why I was wrong. And you can take this one to the bank. Here's what happened. Now, I worked at this large Fortune 500 company. They didn't have one or two programmers. They had hundreds of programmers. Okay? In fact, they had a whole floor that was for programmers. So, I thought, well, in the future, there's going to be more women programmers. Now, when I worked in this company, I remember one of the bosses told me women are only good for one thing. Now, this guy was not American. Back then, most of the bosses were American. And most of the programmers were from India. Now, this guy was European, but, whatever. That's neither here nor there. But most of the bosses were Americans. Okay, as time went by, the number of programmers went from about 57% India to like 95%. And then all the bosses were from India, and not only that, but you would hear constant chatter in Hindi. People didn't speak English anymore. Constant chatter in Hindi. And one of the bosses said, well, one of the requirements of working here is that you need to know Hindi. It doesn't matter if you know English or not. That's not important. What's important is that you know Hindi, because, let's face it, most of the programmers are from India. And I remember there used to be, I think there was a woman programmer from China, there was a woman programmer from India, there was another woman programmer, I think, from Jamaica, and, but most of the women programmers were from America, mostly. And the thing that I always thought was kind of interesting is I believed that the percentage of women programmers would grow as the years went on. And people have come up with all kinds of theories as to why the percentage of women programmers has, instead of increasing, it's gone down, and gone down a lot. And some people say, well, that's because programmers are seen as nerds, and women don't want to hang out with a bunch of nerds, and that's not the reason. Because let's face it, some people like that job, some people don't like that job. But I would tell you that the majority of the reason why you have a decrease in computer programmers that are women is the company started hiring a bunch of people from India. And they didn't care. They just hired people from India, and they just got rid of all the American programmers. All of them. They just fired them. And then when you talk to the boss, he'd say, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm very busy right now. I don't want to talk about that anymore. And so, I didn't just talk to the, the top executives. I talked to one of the managers from India. And I said, well, I don't understand. Why is it that you don't hire programmers except from India? And he said, well, all the Chinese programmers, they're all stupid. And I said, that's not true. I know, because I worked here and I knew a lot of Chinese programmers. They were very good programmers. Oh, you don't know anything. You're an idiot. I'm a manager. I know. And I said, well, why don't you hire Americans? And he said, well, Americans are all fat and lazy. That's why I hire people from India. And I said, really? How would you like it if some guy from America came to your country, worked as a manager, only hired Americans, and then he said, oh, I don't hire people from India because they're all fat and lazy and stupid? I mean, how would you like that? Oh, well, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I'm very busy right now. And he just took off. And I'm like, of course that guy's not going to hire women programmers. Because I asked him, why don't you hire women programmers? He said, women need to be in the home taking care of children. I mean, I felt like saying, guy, like, the 1700s call, they want you back. I mean, you know, what century are we on? Are we in the 21st century? Because it seems to me like you're still stuck in the past. No, there's good women programmers. Oh no, he didn't believe in that. He just hired guys, and all from India, all. And so I talked to one of the big executives. You know, he's constantly talking about making cuts and outsourcing and downsizing. He needs to fire someone. He needs to make more cuts. He needs to outsource and downsize. And this guy, the only word that would come out of his mouth was outsource, outsource, outsource. And so I said, well, you know, why do you do this? And he said, well, he told me the reason. He said, well, you see, you know, years ago, I had this guy from Panama who was a programmer. He was a really good programmer. He said, but I had to put him down as Hispanic, even though the guy was black. And they said, no, it doesn't matter. If he's from Panama, he is Hispanic. It doesn't matter what color he is. You know, he could be any color, but it doesn't matter. He's Hispanic. Now, if I hire a guy from China, I have to put down that he's from Asia. But, he said, here's the thing. If I hire a person from India, I get to put down that they're black. So I use them to fill my quota. So, you know, let's face it, you know, they were complaining. They were saying, hey, most of the black people you have working for you are janitors. What's going on here? You don't have any professionals that are black. So I hired all these guys from India. Got to make cuts. Excuse me. Got to go fire someone. Downsize. I have to fire someone. I'm an executive. Cut. Got to fire someone. Cut. And he's like, you know, he's constantly trying to fire someone. And he said, but, you know, instead of firing these guys, he said, if I didn't have to fill the quota, I would just have them all work from India and pay them even less than I'm already paying them. He said, already I'm paying them almost nothing. So, I mean, I would pay them even less, you know, because, you know, you can get programmers in India for like $3,000 a year. Do you know how much money I'm paying these guys? I'm paying them $15,000 a year. And I couldn't believe it. So I asked one of the programmers, I asked him, how much money are you making? And he goes, 15 there. 50, hey, that's pretty good. You're making 50,000 a year. I said, no, I'm not making 50,000 a year. I'm making 15,000 a year. So he told me, if it wasn't for the quota, I would hire the programmers in India and pay them 3,000 a year instead of paying them 15,000. But in order to fill the quota, I have all these guys, you know, here, you know, in the U.S. working, and none of them has, you know, like a work visa. None of them have an H-1B. He said, no, I just put that, you know, that it's an emergency and that I need people. And then they say, oh, you don't have any minorities working. And I say, oh, yes, I do. Look at all the minorities I have working for me. They go, oh, okay. Oh, I guess you have a lot of minorities working for you. I mean, everything is just backwards. So no women programmers, not even one. And all the programmers are from another country, and they're all getting paid garbage. But that's not enough. That's not enough. The guy's constantly talking about, well, you know, the government's going to change the rules, and then I'll be able to have all these guys working from home meaning India, and I'll still list them as being here in the U.S. Don't ask me how he does that one. I have no idea. I don't know. Maybe it's a lie, but that's what he told me. The only thing he can do is fire people and outsource and downsize. He's constantly talking about how he has to fire more people, because that way the stock will go up. He wants the stock to go up, so he's constantly firing more people. And he's constantly downsizing, because he is an executive. He needs to downsize. He needs to cut fat. He needs to trim expenses. So, I mean, that's what he's doing. So, I mean, I'm like, okay, you know, you do what you have to do, but, you know, I'm just putting it out for you. When people tell you, oh, I don't understand why there aren't more women programmers. Well, maybe because they don't hire any. Maybe that's the reason. That's a pretty good reason, I would say. Because at one time, if a woman programmer was doing a good job, she could work there. And this is a big Fortune 500 company. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you which one, otherwise I'd get in trouble. But if you were to ask for a job now, they would say, oh, we don't have any job for you. And they wouldn't care. They don't care. They just want to pay garbage, and, you know, that's just how it is. And they say that they need to do this in order to compete with China. And I'm saying, how many guys from India work in China? They look at you kind of funny. They're saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm very busy right now. I don't want to talk about that anymore. But so, I mean, that's what they're doing. What they're doing is they're firing all the American programmers, and then they're bringing in all these guys from India, and they're paying them garbage. And the only thing the executives can do is talk about how they have to make more cuts, downsize more, and fire more people. That way the stock will go up. So, there you have it. Because at one time, I honestly thought, as years go by, you'll see more and more women programmers. In fact, you've seen the opposite. Because, I remember a time when I could walk in there, down the halls, and I'm not going to say every single cubicle, had an American in it, because even then, it was more than half people from India. But they had a few Americans working there. Now they don't have even one. They don't have even one boss that's American. Not even one. And all the bosses are from India. All the programmers are from India, with like a very few exceptions. There's still a few stragglers. There's still a few people from the old days there. Somehow they're still there for some reason or whatever. I think there used to be this guy who was really good at doing databases or something. He's still there. And there's this other guy who's still there. But I mean, there's very, very few people like that. The majority of people are like 95% are from India, and the bosses are also from India, and that's just how it is. And when I tell this to people, they tell me they're a liar, that I'm making it up, and I'm like, well, then come with me. Come with me. I'll show you. I'll show you the whole floor. The whole floor. You'll see that I'm not lying to you. I'm not making this up. I'm not pretending that things are a certain way. And what they say is, oh, well, that's just the way it is. And they would have all those programmers moved offshore, with a blink of an eye, except that they have to fill the quota. That's why they're doing it. But the reason they're doing it is the quota. They have this quota that they have to fill, and it has to do with minorities, and it has to do with professionals. Because at one time, according to the boss, they did not break down the positions. So, if you hired like a bunch of janitors, that were minority, that was it. You were free and clear. But then they said, no, we have to look at how many professionals you have that are minorities. And and then they look at how many executives you have that are minorities. So you see, a lot of these guys from India, they're not just managers. They're like directors and vice presidents and everything. It's great. Let me see. How do you think the people from India would enjoy if a guy hired a bunch of Americans, and then he hired the managers were also Americans, and he wouldn't hire any people from India, not even one, just people from America, and then he would say that the people from India are all lazy and stupid, and then he would say, no, but I have to fill the quota. Because you see, I have a quota that says I have to hire foreigners, and I cannot hire Americans, because that's just the way it is. I mean, does that make any sense to anybody? Because I mean, I'm like, wait a minute, something's not adding up here. This does not make any sense. But that's what he said. That's what the executive told me. That's just the way it is. I have to make the quota, and I don't care. The law is the law, and I just do what I'm told. If they say you have to have this number of professionals that are minorities, I just hire a bunch of foreigners, and I don't care if Americans don't have jobs. That's their problem. I'm an executive. I have to make cuts. I have to fire someone. I have to, make more cuts. That's it. There you go.